Then I saw it, a document stamped HOA Expansion Plan A Phase 3. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just skimming off the top as she was planning to seize more cabins, claiming they were non-compliant or abandoned, just like she tried with mine. If we hadn't fought back, she'd have claimed half the lakefront by year's end. I sent everything to Rick and Sheriff Donnelly. Then I called the local news. I didn't shout or point fingers. I simply showed the receipts, photos, and witness statements. That evening, it aired on the 6 p.m. broadcast. Lakeview HOA president under investigation for fraud and property theft. Karen's face was blurred, but her voice screaming at the reporter played clear as day. Then came Travis, standing in front of my burned boathouse, his voice steady. She lied to me. She stole from the neighborhood, and I won't stay silent anymore. By dawn, the town council called an emergency hearing. But before it could even take place, something happened I'll never forget. I came home to find the fence I'd built of posts, iron slats, all of it gone, cut down, uprooted, and tossed into the lake like trash. Pinned to my front door with a hunting knife was a single note: "Back off, this is your last warning." I looked at the twisted metal floating on the water. The lake breeze carried the smell of wet rust. "You should have stopped at my fence," I whispered to no one, because what I did next would bring the whole rotten house down. I pulled the knife from the door. Its blade still quivered in my hand, and not just a threat, but a promise. The kind of coward's message you leave when you're desperate, when you know you're losing. But I didn't back off. I doubled down. I opened my laptop and uploaded everything I had: photos, receipts, Travis's sworn statement, even audio clips from home meetings to a secure cloud drive. Then I shared the folder with 3 people: Rick, Sheriff Donnelly, and someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Janet McBride. She'd been my late wife's best friend, and now she was a state auditor and investigative journalist. She picked up on the first ring. "I saw the news, Mark," she said, skipping hello. "Didn't expect to see your name wrapped in this. I'm sending you something," I told her. 5 minutes later, she called back. Her voice was low, serious. "Mark Brokenbar, this isn't just HOA corruption. This is state-level fraud. Some of these fake companies trace back to a property scheme out of Billings. I've seen this pattern before." "How deep?" I asked. She hesitated. "Let's just say Karen might be a pawn. Someone's been using her to funnel money, land grabs, crooked development contracts, even illegal tax rebates." That felt like a punch to the ribs. "She's not working alone," I whispered. "No," Janet said. "And if we want to stop this, we have to make it public before they cover their tracks." That same day, she drove down from Helena. We met by the old marina, pretending it was just a casual walk. Janet, with her short gray hair, dark sunglasses, and leather notebook, looked more like a detective than a reporter. "I'll go live with the story in 48 hours, she told me. "But you need to protect yourself." That night, I quietly moved out of my cabin just for a while. I didn't tell anyone, not even Rick. I left the porch light on, set up motion sensors, and parked my truck at an angle to look like I was still home. Then I stayed with old Joe, 2 houses down. From his attic window, we waited. And 2 nights later, they came. At exactly 1:42 a.m., 2 hooded figures crept up to my cabin. One carried a crowbar, the other, a gas can. Joe and I watched on my phone, streaming the porch camera. "They're gonna torch it," Joe whispered, his voice tight. "Not tonight," I whispered back. An hour earlier, I'd called Sheriff Donnelly, told him I had a feeling something was coming. Just as the first figure raised the crowbar to smash the window, floodlights snapped on, washing the yard in blinding white. Sheriff cruisers rolled in fast. Within seconds, both intruders were cuffed on the ground, caught on camera, speechless. One was Karen's boyfriend, the other, a contractor whose name showed up on 4 fake invoices paid by the HOA for emergency landscaping. Sheriff Donnelly looked straight at the porch camera and gave a thumbs up. It felt over. For a moment, I thought it was. The next morning, I went back to the cabin. Nothing was burned, nothing broken, but something was missing. The knife, the same hunting knife they'd pinned to my door, the one I'd left on the kitchen counter before leaving, gone. That's when the real paranoia set in. I checked every lock, every window and nothing forced. Then I remembered something my father once told me while patching up the pantry wall. The smallest hole lets the biggest trouble through. I searched every inch of the cabin, and behind the closet in the back room, I found a loose panel covering the old cellar vent, big enough for someone to squeeze through. Inside the crawlspace, tucked in the dust, was a folder stuffed with papers Karen clearly never meant to see daylight, blueprints of 3 other lakefront properties, each stamped confiscate in red marker, forged HOA fines and the names of widows who'd passed away years ago, and at the very bottom a list of names, local officials, accountants, even a retired judge, each with a neat little check mark beside them. Karen hadn't just built her own little empire, she'd been part of something bigger. That same afternoon, I handed the folder to Janet. Her hand shook as she flipped through it. "This isn't just local," she whispered. "This is enough to blow it wide open statewide." I stared out at the lake. "All I ever wanted was to fish on weekends," I muttered. Janet gave a sad smile. "Sometimes life hands the quiet man the loudest fight." The very next day, she aired the full report, not just locally, but nationwide. Montana Lake HOA corruption ring exposed, stolen homes, forged deeds, and the quiet man who fought back. The story spread like wildfire. Karen was arrested that morning. Travis was granted immunity. By sunset, the entire HOA board had resigned. But the thing I didn't expect happened that afternoon. I got a letter from the state governor, a formal thank you, and an invitation to join a statewide council for ethical property management. But that wasn't what meant the most. 2 weeks later, as I started rebuilding the boathouse, I heard footsteps behind me. A small group of neighbors walked up, carrying hammers, nails, and lumber. One by one, without saying a word, they started helping. Even little Abigail from Lot 9 brought a pitcher of lemonade. I didn't cry not until we finished framing the walls. Then Miss Nancy handed me something, a new, restored print of the old photo she'd given me, the one of my dad, shirtless, grinning by the dock. "This belongs back here," she said, pointing to the fresh wood. We hung it right in the center, where smoke and fire couldn't reach it again. But just as peace seemed to settle over Lakeview, a black SUV rolled quietly into town. Unfamiliar plates, unfamiliar faces. A man stepped out, dressed sharp, briefcase in hand. He didn't knock, didn't look around. He walked straight up to the old HOA office door and pinned up a sign. "Temporary management appointed by state receiver. Lakeview properties under review." The corruption might have been exposed, but now, someone new had stepped in. I didn't know yet if they were friend or foe. The sign was government issued, bold letters, nailed dead center on the door, clean, official, and impossible to ignore. The notice on the office door was stark and official. Temporary management appointed by state receiver. Investigation active. Within hours, the whole town was buzzing. Small knots of neighbors gathered outside the building, whispering, speculating. Nobody knew who the new guy was. The man in the black SUV hadn't returned since pinning the notice. All we knew was that Lakeview wasn't done being watched. I stood back from the crowd, arms folded, an uneasy weight settling in my chest. We'd fought tooth and nail to bring Karen down, exposed forged deeds and burned boathouses, yet now some stranger from the state was stepping in to take control of everything we'd bled to protect. That evening, I sat with Rick on my rebuilt porch, sipping iced tea as the sun slipped behind the pines. "They always bring in a state receiver after something this big," Rick explained. "Someone neutral to freeze the books and clean house." "Neutral doesn't always mean helpful," I muttered, eyes on the lake. Rick nodded. "True, just be careful, Mark. You rattled a lot of cages." The next morning, the man returned, same black SUV, same black briefcase, suit pressed sharp as a knife grease. He stepped out and introduced himself to the town as Mr. Holt, governance compliance officer from Helena. Tall, stiff, eyes that moved like searchlights, reading everything and everyone. That afternoon, he called a meeting at the community center. Everyone was invited. I got there early and sat in the back row, wanting to watch before being seen. Mr. Holt stepped up front, cleared his throat, and spoke like a judge handing down a sentence. "There has been a breakdown in fiduciary trust here in Lakeview," he announced. "For that reason, I have been assigned to freeze all HOA activity until a new legal and ethical framework can be put in place. Some people clapped. Mr. Holt didn't even blink. During this period, he went on, there will be no building permits issued, no assessments levied, no fines collected, and no property transfers approved without my written authorization. Acting outside of this process could lead to prosecution. The applause died. The room settled into a tense silence. I will also review every property deed within the association, Holt continued, including those previously disputed or transferred in the past 3 years. That made my stomach drop. My cabin was on that list. I raised my hand. His eyes cut to me, sharp and impatient. Mark Palmer, I said, do you have the documents submitted in the investigation? I do, he answered flatly. And you've seen that my ownership was reaffirmed by both the court and the county? I have. Then why reopen something already judged? His gaze turned glacial. To ensure, he said, each word deliberate, that no bias, bribery, or procedural error tainted the decision. My jaw clenched. This wasn't about just Hisia, it was about power. He wasn't here to fix the town, he was here to hold it under his thumb. That night, I called Janet and told her everything. She didn't sound surprised. Some receivers are clean, she said softly. Others, just wolves in new wool. I'll dig into his background. But I didn't wait. I spent half the night pulling state contracts, public records, and legal appointments. And what I found chilled me worse than Karen ever had. Mr. Holt wasn't just a state officer. He'd worked for a private development firm that specialized in turning lakefront communities into luxury resorts. And guess who paid them? I printed the file and took it to Rick. He studied it, lips pressed thin. If this is real, he said slowly, they're not just here to clean up, they're here to take over everything at the whole damn lake. Later that night, my cabin window shattered again, and not from rocks, but from a brick wrapped in paper. Stop asking questions. Fear returned like smoke creeping under it, or the same tension Karen had woven around this town, but now with a new face. The next morning, Travis showed up, pale and nervous, holding an envelope. It came from my mom's old files, he said. I thought you should see it. Inside was a typed letter on fancy letterhead from Golden Pine Developments. It thanked Karen for her efforts in transitional property arrangements and said they looked forward to reopening discussions once the situation stabilized. She was cutting a deal? I murmured. Travis nodded, his jaw tight. By dawn, a fencing crew rolled in, unloading steel panels from a flatbed. Same team. Same foreman of the same no-nonsense guy who had once helped fence me out of my own cabin on Karen's orders. This time, I handed him a bigger blueprint. Go wide, I told him. Start at lot 17, wrap around the whole building, and keep going until you hit the north irrigation channel. I want that building inside my perimeter before sunset. He raised an eyebrow. You know this is going to ruffle feathers, right? I smiled. Good, let them fly. Because this wasn't about my cabin anymore. It was about every neighbor fined over a garden gnome, every senior who paid phantom fees, every family that Karen and her friends tried to squeeze out. And if Mr. Holt thought he could quietly hand this town over to a resort developer, he was in for the loudest fight of his life. It wasn't just about fences anymore. It was about every scare tactic, every fine, every threat people had endured under Karina and now under Holt. Most of all, it was about showing everyone that we still had power. Rick showed up an hour later with fresh copies of the revised property boundaries. He spread them across the hood of my truck, tapping them with a calloused finger. Based on your father's original purchase, he said, tracing the lines, and the newly reaffirmed court order, this stretch here, he circled a section in Rada, includes the road leading directly to the HOA office. You're saying, I said slowly, I could block them out? Rick nodded. You could fence them in, cut off the driveway, even shut off water and revoke the electrical easements. And Holt knows it. Wouldn't they just challenge it in court? They can try. Rick shrugged. But by the time they win or lose, your story won't just be local anymore. It'll be everywhere. And that was exactly the point. This wasn't just about shutting the mina, it was about sending a message. By mid-afternoon, the crew had finished. Steel posts, jet black panels, a perfect rectangle wrapped tight around the whole building. Holt's shiny SUV was trapped inside. The gate lock heated from my side. It didn't take long for Holt to notice. He stormed up to the fence, rattling it with white-knuckled fists. "Mr. Palmer, this is illegal. You can't do this." I stepped forward, hands in my pockets. "I warned you," I said, calm but unyielding. "You came for my cabin, you came for my name, and then you tried to push me off land I legally own." His face flushed red. "This is obstruction of state operations." "No," I told him. "This is private land, and until a court tells me otherwise, you're just a guest on it." People gathered, phones out, recording. Neighbors cheered, and then came the news vans. By evening, it was on every local broadcast. Retired forester fences in HOA headquarters. State appointee trapped in ongoing Lakeview scandal. But that wasn't the real blow. The next day, Janet McBride's investigation aired nationwide. The man who fought the fence. How a quiet retiree took down a corrupt HOA and the state itself. She showed everything. Broken windows, forged documents, stolen fees. And at the end, she dropped the hammer: a leaked memo from Golden Pine Developments dated 6 months earlier, thanking Mr. Holt for clearing the path to future development rights in Lakeview and promising him a 6-figure consulting bonus. The state's neutral receiver wasn't just a wolf, he was on payroll. By noon, the governor's office announced Holt's suspension. By 3 p.m., state police escorted him out from behind my fence. The gate opened for him that one time, and never again. 3 weeks passed. The fence stayed up, no longer a barrier, but a monument. The HOA was dissolved. Karen's trial date was set, and me, somehow, the neighbors voted me in to lead the new Lake Community Council, and not built on fear, but on service. We tore up the old fine system, rewrote the rules, and turned the former HOA office into a library and youth center. My cabin stayed just as it was, a scarred but standing. I replaced the porch swing, refinished the walls where they carved threads, and hung my father's photo next to his Bronze Star. Above it, a small wooden sign: "Respect is the strongest boundary." One quiet Sunday, as I sat on the porch with coffee in hand, Travis stopped by. He didn't stay long, just handed me an envelope. Inside, a short note: "For the tree I cut without asking, for the porch swing I used without knowing, for the damage I didn't cause but didn't stop." Taped to it, a check for $1,000. I didn't cash it, I framed it instead. Some debts aren't about money, they're about finally seeing where the line is drawn, and knowing it matters. So if you're watching this from a small town, or living under a petty HOA president who thinks rules are weapons, remember, you can be kinda and still fight back. You can build fences that don't just protect your land, but protect your dignity. And if anyone tries to erase your roots, build taller, stronger, wider, even if it means wrapping a fence clear around their throne. Because this was my home, and no Karina, not then, not now, not ever, was going to take it from me again. The last thing I expected to find when I pulled up to my lake cabin was a stranger lounging on my porch swing, sipping iced tea as if he owned the place. But there he was, shirtless, wearing flip-flops, chatting away on a Bluetooth headset like it was part of his daily routine. "Hey," I called out as I climbed out of my pickup, shielding my eyes from the midday sun. "Need something?" He barely reacted, just turned his head slowly and said, "You must be the neighbor. I'm Travis. This place belongs to me now." I felt my chest tighten. "No, sir," I said, stepping up onto the porch. "This cabin's been in my family since 1982. Best get off that swing before we've got a real problem." He actually laughed a low, mocking chuckle, then stood up at his own pace. "The HOA president told me it was reassigned," he explained, "said it had been left empty and unclaimed, so she signed it over. My mom handled all the paperwork." "Your mom?" And that's when it clicked. Travis, a broken bar Karen's kid. Ho Karen. Turns out, she'd handed my family cabin over to her own son. My shock turned to a shaking rage. That porch swing he was so comfortable on, my grandpa built it. The pines surrounding the cabin, I planted those when I was 12. And now this smug, sunburned surfer boy acted like I'd never existed. But instead of arguing, I turned and walked back to my truck. I drove a few blocks to the edge of the HOA building and pulled out my phone. Within a few hours, a delivery truck rolled in with fencing supplies, and 2 helpers showed up. Inside me, a quiet promise had formed: if they were going to mess with my boundaries, I'd make new ones as a stronger ones. We started installing a tall, black steel fence, not just around my cabin, but stretching it across the road and right up beside the HOA's headquarters. By the time Karen stormed outside to see what the commotion was, one of the fence posts had already crushed her precious tulip bed. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched. I gave her a calm smile. "Fencing in what's mine." Her face flushed bright red. "You can't block our office." I pulled out the blueprints I'd filed 2 years back. "Actually, I can." She stared, speechless. But before she could argue, the auger spun again, and the post driver slammed another steel stake into the ground, rattling the wall of her building. Before she turned to leave, she spat out, "You'll regret this, Mr. Palmer." Watching her go, I muttered under my breath, "No, Karen, you will." But the real twist was yet to come. Before the fence, before Travis showed up with his iced tea, and before the shouting, let me tell you how it all began. My name's Mark Palmer, born and raised in Columbia Falls, Montana. I'm 55 now, a retired forester. My dad bought this lake cabin back in '82, after years working at the sawmill. It isn't grand, but it's filled with family history, carvings, old tools, and notes we grandkids scribbled on the walls over the decades. When Dad passed, the cabin became my weekend refuge. A couple of years back, an HOA formed around the lake, supposedly to protect property values. At first, I didn't think much of it. A little order never hurt, right? But it didn't take long to see what happens when power lands in the wrong hands. The woman in charge, Karen Dwyer, could have passed for a bulldozer in designer clothes. Her smile never reached her eyes, and she wore blazers like she was headed to court. Even at the lake, she started with petty rules, enforcing non-existent quiet hours, ranting about window shutters, and leaving nasty notes on cars parked the wrong way in private driveways. Folks grumbled, but most just kept their heads down. As for me, I made a point to stay polite. I'd wave every time I saw her. I've always believed a little kindness can soften even the hardest people, or so I thought. Then last fall, I had to leave for Oregon to help my sister recover from surgery. I was gone for 6 months, but I made sure the cabin was locked up tight, taxes paid, and asked my friend Joe to check in now and then. When I came back earlier this summer, Joe met me at the gas station, looking uneasy. "Mark, there's something odd happening at your place," he said. I frowned. "What kind of odd?" Joe scratched his beard. "Didn't want to spread gossip, but I saw some young guy moving furniture in. Figured maybe you'd rented it out." I shook my head. "Never." And that's when I drove over and found Travis sitting on my porch swing. So now, here I was, overseeing this iron fence slicing through the HOA's made-up rules and shaking the very walls of their little kingdom. Funny thing about quiet folks, people mistake kindness for weakness, but they forget the quiet ones pay attention. The kind ones build resolve over years. And the humble ones? We always know exactly where our boundary lines lie. Just when I thought the fence would be enough to put Karen in her place, something else happened that very night. As the crew packed up and I sipped my coffee in the truck, a black SUV pulled in behind me, headlights bright. A man stepped out of dark glasses, clipboard in hand. He knocked on my window. "You Mark Palmer?" I nodded. "That's me." He turned the clipboard around. "Cease and desist order from the HOA board." I narrowed my eyes. "On what grounds?" Before he could answer, Travis came charging out of my grandfather's cabin, hammer in hand, yelling into the night, "You can't take this place from me. My mom promised." The man glanced at Travis, then back at me. Broken bar, I swear. A tiny smirk curled on his fascia because right then and there, in front of the whole neighborhood, Travis made a fatal mistake. He admitted, loud and clear, that he knew the place wasn't his. That changed everything. But I didn't say a word. Just rolled up my window, turned the engine over, and let the tension simmer because the real fight was only just beginning. And what happened the next morning, that flipped the entire HOA upside down. Where are you all watching this from? Drop it in the comments. Trust me, you're going to want front row seats for what comes next. The morning mist was still floating over the lake when the banging started. Not polite knocking, this was angry, urgent pounding on metal. I opened my eyes from where I dozed off in my truck, parked right in the driveway, just in case. 3 HOA board members stood outside the fence I'd started building the day before, wearing clip-on badges and cheap ties like they were running a crime scene. "Mr. Palmer," one of them barked, "you're in violation of Obstruction Code 4B, subsection 12. I stepped out, raised an eyebrow. "That fence is on my land. Got the original boundary maps right here." "Not anymore," another snapped, waving a manila folder. "Karen redrew the lot lines while you were gone. This cabin is now Lot 42A under Travis Dwyer." They thought they had me. But I knew a bluff when I saw one. Without saying a word, I walked over to the post where I'd bolted a lockbox, opened it, and pulled out my certified land survey, stamped, notarized, county approved. "This shows the cabin and the entire 2-acre property in my name, and the county reaffirmed it 2 weeks ago." They went silent. One turned red, another started flipping pages like the truth might magically change. I waited for them to admit defeat. Instead, they threatened, "We'll see you in court," before stomping off. But here's the thing about court. I'd already been. Months ago, when the HOA started sending strange letters, I'd updated my title, reaffirmed my boundaries, and filed a quiet title action just in case they tried something. I never trusted Karen. Something in her eyes always looked like thunder on the horizon. But now, it seemed worse than I'd thought. So that afternoon, I drove into town to see Rick, a lawyer who owed me a favor from years back when I helped him clear timber off his dad's land. Rick was already at the diner, lemonade sweating on the table. "You were right," I told him. He nodded, flipping open a folder. "They filed a quitclaim deed under your name." "Forged." He slid it across. My signature was there, but the handwriting wasn't mine. Rick tapped the page. "Not only is this illegal if we can prove Karen orchestrated it, she's looking at real charges." My stomach sank. Karen hadn't just tried to steal my cabin, she'd faked documents to do it. And Travis? Either he knew and didn't care, or he was happy to enjoy the benefits. "You think she's done this before?" I asked. Rick leaned back. "I'd bet my boots on it." I stared at the fake deed, heart pounding. "Then we fight back." And that night, I did more than fight. I dug out my dad's old notebook of property sketches, receipts, dated photos of him building the cabin by hand. I scanned everything, made copies, then quietly dropped them into every neighbor's mailbox, along with a note. "What would you do if your home was stolen while you were helping family? Next, it could be yours." Just a neighbor who remembers what this lake used to stand for. By morning, the neighborhood had woken up. I watched from the driveway as Karen, hair unbrushed, panic all over her face, stormed out of the HOA office in sweats, flanked by 2 officers. "They're turning on me," she shouted. "Who put these lies in everyone's mailbox?" It was chaos. But I stayed back, quiet. Kindness had carried me this far, but now it was time to show them the other side of the coin. Later that evening, as I was restacking firewood by the cabin, I saw someone stumbling along the shoreline. Travis, half-empty bottle in hand, shoulders drooping. He climbed up to the porch and collapsed onto my swing and started crying. Actual tears. "I didn't know," he mumbled into the dusk. "She said it was a gift, said she could sign it over. I thought it was just paperwork." I stepped closer. "She lied to you." He looked up, startled but didn't deny it. I handed him a glass of water, then sat on the steps beside him. "You know," I said, "if you really believed this place was yours, you would have brought your own furniture." He let out a shaky laugh. "Fair." We sat in silence for a while, the lake rippling in the twilight. "You can't undo what your mom did," I told him, "but you can stop playing along." He stared at the bottle, then tossed it into the lake, wiping his eyes. "I'll talk," he whispered. "Whatever you need, I'll testify." It was a strange, heavy moment, but it felt like the first crack in Karen's wall and the beginning of something bigger. One thing I've learned in life: people make bad choices when they follow bad leaders. And sometimes, they just need someone to show them a better path. Still, I didn't let my guard down. The next morning, Rick called. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen just filed a motion to condemn your fence." "What?" "She claims it's a public hazard, says it blocks emergency access to the HOA office and is aggressive in design." It was a fence. But Rick wasn't finished. "And Mark, You should know she also filed a restraining order against you. Says you threatened her with construction tools. I felt my chest tighten. This is getting out of hand, I whispered. Rick lowered his voice. I agree, but there's one more thing. Remember the county assessor who signed off on your deed last month? Yeah? He just got a complaint from the HOA accusing him of taking a bribe. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just throwing wild punches anymore. She was desperate, willing to ruin people's reputations, even get them fired, just to hold on to power. But what she didn't know, I had already requested every single HOA financial record under public access laws, and what I found in those files would burn her little empire to the ground. I wasn't ready to release it yet, not until one more thing happened. That night, when I returned to the cabin, my heart stopped. The door was ajar, lights on, drawers yanked open and dumped out like trash, and carved into the pantry wall my father built with his own hands were 5 words, "Get out or else." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, boots still dusty from the road, jacket heavy with dew. The only sound was the soft creak of the porch swing moving in the breeze. They had crossed a line. Karen hadn't just forged a deed or tried to bury me in paperwork. Maybe her. Maybe someone she'd sent had broken into my home. They'd tossed my photos, touched my father's tools, and desecrated the last place on earth that still felt like family. I checked the rest of the house. Bedroom drawers spilled onto the floor, kitchen knives missing, papers scattered everywhere. And under my bed, the wooden box where I kept my dad's World War II medals, opened, empty. Who steals another man's memories? The next morning, I didn't call the sheriff. I drove straight to his office. Sheriff Donnelly was an old buddy from high school. We drifted apart, but I knew he still respected folks who worked hard and played fair. He listened as I laid everything out, the forged deed, the fence fight, the ransacking, the threat carved into my wall. Sounds like the HOA's getting bolder, he muttered, rubbing his temples. But breaking and entering, that's a different ballgame. He opened a file and shook his head. Funny you came in today. We've had 2 other lake property owners report strange things lately. Missing garden statues, overturned mailboxes, windows left wide open. I leaned in, and I bet they all clashed with Karen. Most likely, he nodded. I told him my theory. Karen was retaliating against anyone who pushed back. That she didn't realize how deep this mess had gotten because she thought no one would fight her. She picked the wrong man this time, I told him. Donnelly gave me a cautious smile. You're not wrong, but be careful, Mark. Karen's got friends in high places as her cousins on the county board. I raised an eyebrow. That explains a lot. And that's when Donnelly slid something across the desk. Just between us, he said. It was a small flash drive, label written in Sharpie, HOA Karen 2021. This was found in Travis Dwyer's car, he explained. Deputies saw him passed out at the marina, slumped over the wheel. We can't open it without a warrant. But you're not law enforcement. I took it, my heart pounding. Back at the cabin, door newly locked and reinforced, I fired up my old laptop and plugged it in. What I saw made my breath catch. Dozens of PDF files, forged documents, HOA checks written to suspicious businesses, payments to something called Lakeview Legal Consultants, but the bank listed it as a tanning salon 2 towns over. Clear, brazen fraud. Karen had been funneling HOA money Armania into fake accounts. I could have run to the sheriff, the papers, or the evening news, but this time, I wanted the truth to come from the people, not the system Karen thought she owned. So, I planned a lake neighbors potluck. No permits, no HOA approval, just food, folding chairs, and the truth. That Saturday, more than 60 people showed up, plates of barbecue and casseroles, kids running barefoot on the grass. And in the middle of it all, I stood up, holding that flash drive. Martha from Lot 12 brought deviled eggs. John from Lot 6 grilled burgers right there on a battered old charcoal grill. Even Miss Nancy from the East Cabins rolled in on her scooter, balancing 2 trays of cornbread on her knees. I waited, let everyone settle. The sun dipped low, casting long gold shadows across the lawn. Then I stepped forward, hand raised. Neighbors, I began. I didn't come here planning to speak tonight, but something's happened, something all of you deserve to know. Just then, Karen stepped out of the HOA office, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. I reached into my folder and pulled out printed copies of what I'd found on the flash drive. "This is proof," I said, voice steady. "The HOA has been stealing from us." A ripple ran through the crowd of gasps, low murmurs. Karen's voice cracked across the lawn. "That's a lie." I didn't yell back. Instead, I walked through the gathered neighbors, handing out copies, forged signatures, fake invoices, payments to phony companies. People began to see it for themselves. Murmurs turned into low, angry voices. Someone shushed Karen when she tried to shout again. Then Jeremy stood up, and a quiet fisherman nobody ever heard speak more than a couple words. "I voted for her 3 times, he said quietly. "Even helped her replace her fence. But there's a broken bar. This is stealing." Another voice: "She fined me for a birdhouse." And another: "She threatened to tow my car while I was sick in bed." It was like a dam broke. Karen turned, bolted for the office, and slammed the door behind her. People weren't shouting and raggy, they were fired up, alive. A woman called out, "What do we do next?" "We vote her out," I said. "And then we fix this place together." For the first time, it felt like hope. But that hope didn't last. That night, walking back to my cabin under a bright, full moon, I saw an orange flicker near the shoreline. It danced and twisted in the dark. I ran. The closer I got, the clearer it became. My boathouse was on fire. I dropped everything, sprinted to the lake, scooped water with a bucket and threw it against the flames. It did nothing. Old, dry boards burned like paper. The roof groaned, then collapsed in a rush of sparks. Neighbors came running. Someone called the fire department. But by the time they arrived, it was too late. Just smoldering ruins. Then a firefighter walked over, holding something half-melted and blackened. It was the frame of the last photo I had of my dad, standing at that very dock, me on his shoulders. The fire hadn't just destroyed wood, it had burned memories. That's when I knew, Karen didn't just want to scare me, she wanted to erase me. But what she didn't know, sometimes a man is strongest when there's nothing left to lose. By dawn, the air was thick with the smell of wet ash and burnt pine. Blackened beams floated near the shore like dead limbs. The fire crew had gone, leaving behind yellow tape and worried neighbors whispering, "This has gone too far." Someone could have been hurt. I stood there, staring into the wreckage, as if my father's shadow might still be there, handing me a fishing pole. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I took out my phone and called Rick. "We're past paperwork," I said. "You sure?" he asked gently. "Once we go for criminal charges, there's no turning back." "She burned it," I said flatly. "She burned my history." Rick didn't ask another question. "I'll file the motion by noon." Then I made another call to Travis. He answered on the second ring, voice hoarse, like he hadn't slept. "She torched my boathouse," I told him. "Do you still want to make this right?" A pause. Then, "I'll meet you in 30 minutes, at the sheriff's station." When I arrived, Travis was already there, arms crossed, pale, jittery. No smirk this time, no bravado, just a man who realized he'd been used by his mother. Sheriff Donnelly sat us down, turned on a recorder. Travis began to talk. He told how Karen had bragged about using home money to secure the lakefront future, how she'd forged deed transfers with an old notary stamp she never returned, how she'd promised him my cabin if he helped push me out quietly. "She never said to burn anything," Travis whispered. "She just said, make it hard for him to stay." "I think someone took it too far." Donnelly scribbled notes. "That's enough to open a formal investigation," he said. "And Travis, if you sign an affidavit, you might avoid charges." Travis nodded, eyes down. "I just want to fix this." It was strange, sitting across from the man who took over my porch swing, and now watching him help tear down the woman who put him there. When I left the station, I didn't go home. I drove to the lake hardware store, bought 2 big tarps, and returned to what was left of my boathouse. I couldn't rebuild Yedo, but I wouldn't leave it looking like a grave. As I knelt on the dock, hammering the tarp into place, I felt eyes on me. It was Miss Nancy, standing there in her floral coat and wide-brimmed hat, leaning on her walker, sharp-eyed despite her 82 years. "Remember when your daddy built that dock?" Miss Nancy said softly, leaning on her walker. "He used to let my boys fish off it while he read the paper." I managed a weak smile. She reached into her worn purse and pulled out a faded photograph. This is from '85. He gave it to my late husband after they poured the concrete base together. In the photo, my father stood shirtless by the fresh-built dock, grinning like he just won the lottery. I didn't even realize I'd started crying until Miss Nancy touched my shoulder. "Karen can't burn what's already planted in people's hearts," she said gently. "You remember that?" That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote an email to every home member, over 140 addresses. I attached everything, the evidence Travis had given, the scans from the flash drive, and ended with one question: is this who we want representing our community? By morning, my inbox exploded. Replies poured in, some shocked, some furious, some apologizing for ever trusting her. By noon, a petition to remove Karen had over 100 signatures. But Karen didn't back down. She locked the HOA office, claiming it was under a temporary audit. Worse, she filed a countersuit against me for defamation, trespassing, and digital theft. Rick just shook his head when he read it. "She's flailing," he said. "We can prove every document's legit. She's just trying to bury you under court dates. Let her dig," I told him. "I've got shovels of my own." But it didn't stop there. 3 nights later, I walked out to find my truck tires slashed. A dead squirrel was nailed to my fence post with a note that read, "Old dogs don't belong here." I took photos, logged everything, and installed cameras around the property. Then came the final straw. On Sunday morning, walking behind the HOA office, I noticed the small garden shed I usually lock was wide open. Inside, piles of files, unshredded and unguarded. I snapped photo after photo: gas bills sent to fake addresses, reimbursements to phantom names, checks signed twice by Karen herself,